August 15th, 1945, radios up and down the United Kingdom crackled with a stirring announcement from Prime Minister Clement Attlee. Japan offered its surrender. Crowds thronged in Piccadilly Circus to celebrate through the night. The British Empire survived, though battered. Yet the United Kingdom soon faced an even greater threat to its power. Crippling challenges remained after the downfall of the Axis powers. Cities in the mother country were devastated, and rebuilding was as daunting as the government was bankrupt, owing $40 billion to foreign creditors by 1946. They were dependent on their ally, the United States, for funding. Though friendly with the US, American leaders expressed disdain for buttressing British colonial projects. Money flowing from the Anglo-American Loan of 1946 and later the Marshall Plan made it challenging for the British government to influence the Truman administration. As the Iron Curtain descended on Europe, the UK also found itself increasingly unable to influence world affairs. Burgeoning superpowers like the US and the Soviet Union dominated the post-war world and began their multi-decade strategic rivalry. While the UK aligned with the Western capitalist democracies, it was a junior partner plagued by problems at home and with its colonies. The Second World War exposed the tenuous grip that the British Empire held over its colonies. The United Kingdom leaned heavily on its overseas territories to supply the war effort during its darkest hours. Burma and Malaya bore the brunt of the combat as the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces cut through British defenses. Britain's image as a powerful, uncontested colonial master crumbled as the Japanese Navy and Army outfought and humiliated British garrisons in Southeast Asia. The appearance of weakness was an opportunity for the largest colony, India, to push even harder for independence. Indians despised colonial authority, and with members of the upper classes receiving British education, the independence movement grew larger and more sophisticated. For years, the British Raj strained under the weight of a burgeoning population, an increased number of Indian civil servants, and a growing amount of sectarian strife. The traditional strategy of appeasing the princes and playing the major ethnic or religious groups against one another faltered. A weakened Britain, out of cash and out of will to crack down on the massive subcontinent, relented. Despite Winston Churchill's insistence that India remain, Attlee's government sought a path to handing over power. He tasked Lord Louis Mountbatten with overseeing the transfer and independence of India. As the last Viceroy and first Governor-General of India, Lord Mountbatten sought to maintain peace between the powerful factions vying for power, while avoiding partition. He and his charming wife played host to some of the most critical leaders of the independence movement, like Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Mahatma Gandhi, to manage these strong personalities. But decades of exploiting divisions hamstrung their efforts. Despite his preference to maintain the status quo, Mountbatten reasoned that the only peaceful solution under his time constraints was partition. With independence came a tumultuous and bloody partition of India between Hindus and Muslims. Minority religious and ethnic groups suffered terribly, as massacres and street battles erupted across the subcontinent. The British colonial police and military forces were far too small and intimidated to prevent the worst of the violence. The loss of India stung. For decades, the civil service in India served as a training ground for ambitious members of the British government, military, and press. More broadly, the imperial project captured the imagination and attention of British society and culture. The Raj had long been known as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. At its height, the British Empire covered a quarter of the world's land and population. To help manage it, the British needed thousands of translators for diplomacy, education, and communication across countless languages. British-held Palestine became an embarrassing disaster. After decades of making contradictory promises to Zionist and Arab groups about who would settle and rule the Holy Land, violence exploded in the region. The Attlee government and British Mandate failed to stem the tide of Jewish immigration after the war. Truman, who sought unity among the Western Allies, pressured Britain to allow more Jewish immigration. At the same time, Zionist paramilitary groups attacked British authorities and troops. When colonial forces responded, their actions were cast down as anti-Semitic and a resumption of the horrors of the Holocaust. To avoid further costs, the British dissolved the Mandate on May 15, 1948. Similar to the partition of India, sectarian violence erupted into ethnic cleansing and massacres. The absence of British authority allowed Israelis to form the State of Israel unilaterally, and for Truman to recognize it, despite the UN's Resolution 181 proposal to divide the region into two states. The partition of India and the dissolution of the British Mandate were the beginning of the end for the British Empire. They were severe psychological blows to the British government and people. The United Kingdom's remaining colonies in Asia and Africa sensed weakness. Independence movements from Burma and Malaya rose. When the Conservative Party returned to power at home, negotiations soured as repression became the new strategy. With the threat of communism looming in every corner of the globe, quashing these movements took on extra priority. During the Malayan emergency, the United Kingdom continued to support Malaya's democratic process of independence, while at the same time fighting the Communist Malayan National Liberation Army. With Commonwealth support, the insurgents were defeated in 1960, 3 years after Malaya's independence. Like their Asian cousins, the African British colonies looked to shaken loose from the empire. Breaking away from imperial authority involved a mix of negotiation and suppression of insurgents, colony by colony. A pattern emerged. The more Europeans lived in a colony, the more willing the United Kingdom was to use force in delaying or denying independence. Kenya's struggle for independence was particularly bloody. Racism and reprisals marked the British response to the anti-colonial movement known as the Mau Mau. Guerrilla fighters and alleged fighters or supporters were rounded up and placed in detention camps. It was the Suez Crisis that captured the bleak prospect of restoring any semblance of British international clout. Egyptian President Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal Company in 1956, seizing control from British and French shareholders. The canal was the artery of maritime trade and had been a strategic linchpin in both world wars. Angered by the seizure, French and British diplomats demanded that Nasser hand back the canal. The Egyptian president refused and asserted his government's ownership. Entering into a partnership with France and Israel, British armed forces raced to secure the vital waterway, fearing that Nasser would close the canal to European traffic. The partners sought assistance and participation from the United States. Still, President Dwight Eisenhower outright rejected the offer and complained that he didn't want America to join a colonial war. The alliance's military forces quickly overwhelmed the Egyptian army and took control, but Cold War superpowers intervened. Both the US and USSR agreed that the British, French, and Israelis had to give up the Canal Zone and that Egypt was to operate it. The incident was a devastating reminder of which powers in the world exerted real influence. The UK was not one of them. Not all decolonization movements resulted in civil war. Nigeria left the empire through relatively peaceful means. By the late 1950s, Parliament under conservative control now saw the maintenance of colonies as a massive drag on a teetering economy. Granting freedom made financial sense. The loss of further prestige and embarrassment on the world stage after the Suez Crisis further encouraged Britain to release its former colonies in Africa. As the empire's degradation accelerated, the consequences of decolonization reached British shores. Immigration from current and former colonies changed the makeup of British society. After 1948, the Windrush generation of immigrants from the Caribbean came to the home islands to provide labor in rebuilding the country. People from Kenya, Pakistan, India, and Hong Kong, amongst many others, formed communities in British cities. Discrimination and racism from native-born Britons, some under increasing financial distress through the 1970s, became prominent. Added to the bubbling racial, ethnic, and sectarian ferment was the continuing and increasingly violent troubles in Northern Ireland. Although the majority of Ireland gained independence in 1922, the Protestant majority counties in the northeast remained in the British Union. Violence between Catholics and Protestants, Unionists and Nationalists, burst into a long-running insurgency between the Provincial Irish Republican Army and the British government. Street battles, terrorist attacks, and reprisals plunged Northern Ireland into chaos from the 1960s to 1998, when the Good Friday Agreement led to an uneasy peace. The violence there spilled over to Great Britain, as IRA members planned assassinations and bombings. The British public was insecure and anxious. With its influence on the wane, the United Kingdom held fast to tiny, far-flung outposts across the globe. Though not rich in resources, these small islands were in strategic locations that granted the armed forces bases to conduct military operations far from home. Gibraltar, Diego Garcia, and Cyprus were staging grounds for the Royal Navy and Air Force. These bases projected power, allowing the UK to punch above its weight. Even if these islands were little more than rocks in the middle of the ocean, Britain went to great lengths to defend them. During the 1980s, Britain's will to shield these far-flung outposts was tested. The Argentine government eyed the Falklands, a group of islands off the east coast of Argentina. These British possessions had little in the way of industry or resources, and yet, as a matter of national pride, the Argentine junta reasoned that an invasion would be best to enforce its claims of sovereignty over the Falklands. They perhaps believed that Britain was too weak or too far away to respond forcefully. Britain, in the midst of a recession, and under the government of the unpopular Margaret Thatcher, struck back with as much force as the remnants of the empire could muster. Determined to recapture the Falklands, the Royal Air Force, Navy, and Army mobilized and fought over great distances. Though the United States was wary of a conflict between the UK and Argentina for fear of driving the South American government into the arms of the Soviet Union, the Reagan administration gave covert and tacit support for the military operations. Despite setbacks and logistical challenges, Britain emerged victorious. At last, it seemed that the old pride of the empire returned. The country basked in the glow of victory and the ability to shape world affairs once again. The Conservative Party was rewarded with a landslide re-election at